Hey everyone, my name's Scott, and I'm normally here with my good friend Nathan, but today and in the next session, it will be just me, so I'll keep it a little bit shorter. It's more fun to have Nathan here and bounce ideas off of each other, and I'd love for you to pick up the book that we're currently working through called The Rhythm of Life by Matthew Kelly, because I just think this is excellent. Great summary of a lot of the other books, a lot of similar ideas to a lot of the other books Nathan and I have done over past year and a half now. And in this book, he breaks it up into parts, not chapters. And so we are about to look at part 6, and I'll break part 6 up into 2 videos. So this part is called The Way of Excellence. And he has a few sections leading up to sharing these, what he calls the 10 principles of excellence or the 10 principles of success. And Matthew Kelly talks a little bit about his childhood and how he was fascinated with people who were very successful and champions. And over time, he boiled down their success to 10 basic principles. And in his preliminary thoughts, he says, we need to know who we are, the best version of ourselves, who God has created us to be. We need to dream without hindrance, without boundaries. We need to consider how we're going to get there, and we need to be committed to working a plan. He gives the example of Itzhak Perlman, the famous violinist, and he says, do you think that he ever said to himself, what is the least I can do and still become the finest violinist in the world? And I won't outline all of this, but it is fascinating to read what Itzhak Perlman's daily routine is and what has made him arguably the finest violinist in the world. And he goes on to say, what's success to you? Have you defined it? He gives various definitions and suggests many people really don't have a definition for what success would look like in their life, but he suggests that Ralph Waldo Emerson's definition is perhaps the best one. And that definition is this: to laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. So again, he goes on to give some preliminary thoughts leading up to this list of 10. The need to have our needs met, as he talked about earlier in the book, our desires, our talents, combined with our passion, discipline, perseverance, and commitment. And he gives this general definition of success, saying success is to become who you truly are. Now, he spends the most amount of time on the very first principle to dive into them. And again, we'll look at the first 5 in this video. And that's the knowledge principle. And that's basically understanding who you are, living out who you believe God has created you to believe. And it does remind me a lot. I won't preach a sermon, which I'm tempted to, but I just think there's such an overlap here, as I believe we've mentioned before in previous videos, with 1 Corinthians chapter 12, which effectively is where Paul's saying God has given every follower of Christ a gift, and we are to use that gift, verse 7 of chapter 12. The manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. And he goes on to say that these various gifts are the work of God, and that God is the giver of the gifts. Every believer has a gift, and God distributes this gift to each one. And the reason the gift is given is for the common good. So that to me is biblical language for understanding who God has made you to be, or as Nathan likes to talk about, what our strengths are. And once we identify those strengths, leveraging those strengths certainly to serve God and to serve others. So if you have time, read through 1 Corinthians chapter 12 with a view toward becoming all that God has created you to be, becoming the very best version of yourself. So that is principle number one. He calls it the knowledge principle, knowing who you are. Spends a lot of time. Fascinating story. I've never heard this. He talks about Leonardo da Vinci, um, and he was looking for when he was commissioned to paint the Last Supper. He went around looking for men that looked like the men in his mind that would be the 12 apostles. And he found them over time, years, literally over years, and he would have them sit and he would paint that person into what we know as the Last Supper, Jesus included. Now, the one he struggled with the most was Judas Iscariot. And it literally says it took Leonardo da Vinci 11 years to find a man who looked like Judas Iscariot. And he went to a prison with permission, of course, and he finally found what he imagined to be Judas Iscariot in this man in prison. And so he asked for his permission to paint him, and permissions were given, and um, there was literally a guard standing there as Da Vinci painted this prisoner who he thought was what he imagined Judas Iscariot to be like. But Da Vinci says as he was painting the man was very distressed. And then finally, Da Vinci's, I'm summarizing, but he basically said, "Are you okay? What is wrong?" Um, and it says, in confusion, Leonardo replied, the prisoner looked expectantly into the artist's eyes and said, "Do you not recognize me, master?" Referring to Da Vinci. In confusion, Leonardo replied, "No, have we met before?" And he says, "Oh, yes," the prisoner explained. 11 years ago, I posed for you for this same painting as the person of Jesus." And then Matthew Kelly says, "In each of us, there is a Judas and a Jesus," which reminds me a lot of Romans chapter 7. If you haven't read it, very similar ideas where the Apostle Paul is saying, uh, this is who I am before God, but this is how I sometimes often act, kind of going back and forth. It's a fascinating parallel, one that I've never heard before. And he draws this section to a close by saying, "Are you prepared to face the Judas in you?" So that's the first principle, is knowing yourself, which takes us to the second one, the dream principle, which we see a lot in Matthew Kelly's writings. He says people who are successful allow themselves to dream and they imagine perfect circumstances. I really like that. What is dreaming? Through the eyes of Matthew Kelly, successful people allow themselves to dream. They imagine perfect circumstances. They place no limitations upon their decision-making process. And he goes on to say, what would be the best? What would be God's will? If I could do anything, what could I do? It's very inspirational. Encourages us to dream without limits. He says, do not dream like a bank manager. A bank manager tells you only what you can afford based on your realized potential. The greater part of all of us is in our unrealized potential. Then he goes on to principle 3. So we have the knowledge principle, the dream principle, and then number 3, the vision principle. Now, I know some people define mission and vision a little bit differently. In this context, Matthew Kelly defines the vision principle basically as um, setting goals and plans to bring out the most in what, or to become all that God has created us to be. He says leaders, legends, heroes, champions, and saints are in the habit of constantly planning and setting goals. So that's the vision principle, and he encourages us, excuse me, to have a vision like that in every area of our lives. So the knowledge principle, the dream principle, the vision principle, and then 4 is the life principle. And really, like this, I've heard this many times. What is your life principle? Like, what is a one sentence summary of what you understand your life to be all about? Or a phrase, even, or an idea. He quotes Mother Teresa. He says that her life principle was to live a life of service to God and neighbor by caring for the poorest of the poor. And then he says he shares his life principle, which is who you become is infinitely more important than what you do or what you have. And he goes on to say, if you don't have one, use somebody else's if it fits, or even use his. And I really like his. Who you become is infinitely more important than what you do or what you have. And on a practical note, he says we should develop the habit of viewing our current life questions or the decisions that we face in relation to our life principle. Who you become is infinitely more important than what you do or what you have. So the knowledge principle, the dream principle, the vision principle, the life principle, and then number 5, and we'll stop here for now, the thought principle. What will it take today for me to become the better person I know I can be? And so here he's really saying, what is your dominant thought for the day? We always have thoughts, and we need to remember that we can take control of those thoughts. And he talks a lot about people like Jack Nicklaus, Michelangelo, Michael Jordan, and basically saying they were consumed by their thoughts to become the greatest version of themselves. And so, what is your dominant thought for the day? And practically, he encourages us first thing in the morning to remember what our dominant thought is for the day, because thought determines action, as we all know. So those are the first 5 principles. I hope that you can join us for the next video, and we'll go through principles 6 through 10. Love to have you out on any given Monday night here at Christ Community Church for our Celebrate Recovery meetings. Nathan and I do these videos because we think they really blend well with recovery principles. And so if you need a recovery group, come join us on a Monday night. We do dinner at 6 p.m. and then our meeting is at 7 p.m. and we have open share groups at 8 on most Monday nights throughout the year. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.